Looking to improve your web application security? Probly is reinventing web application security. Probly focuses on the vulnerabilities that matter, eliminates false positives with evidence-based scanning, and provides a simple point-and-shoot solution that is easy to use. Probly's thorough coverage ensures accurate identification of vulnerabilities in any modern web application or API. Improve your web application security processes by visiting securityweekly.com/Probly and start your free trial today. Software supply chain attacks are continuing to expose vulnerabilities in organizations around the world. The time has come to focus your efforts on security for your software packages. Cloudsmith is the only cloud-native software package management solution for your enterprise. With Cloudsmith Continuous Packaging, you can securely deliver software across the globe and mitigate potential threats from entering your supply chain. With over 23+ formats supported, Cloudsmith is the solution that engineers choose to safely deliver all of their assets. Reduce unneeded downtime and deliver with confidence. Start securing your software supply chain today by visiting securityweekly.com/Cloudsmith.
Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. I'm your host, Mike Shima, joined by John Kinsella. Do you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover on one of the shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and completing the form. We review suggestions monthly and will reach out to you once reviewed. Join us for our next live webcast on December 2nd to see what's under the XDR hood. Visit securityweekly.com/webcasts to save your seat. And do not forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and technical trainings at securityweekly.com/on-demand. And John, while we have a interruption by Max Headroom, oh no, we also have a topic to pick up from last episode. We were talking about cloud and cloud CVEs, and we mentioned that on the tail of Chaos DB and a bunch of lessons that hadn't been learned. We touch on an article that you wanted to highlight. So let's dive into a little bit of that first, quick. Some CVEs for SaaS.
Let's. I was really excited to see this. I think we saw it right before we went on air, and I forgot to put it into show notes, and I realized after I said to you, like, hey, let's cover this. So Wiz was one of the research teams that found some of our bumps in the night at Azure Microsoft this year. And one of their most recent articles, or one of their most recent write-ups, they made a comment about we need a cloud CVE, which, a few of us talked about earlier in this year, but I had no idea how much or how little traction it was getting. It was just something I recognized a wanted need for it. And it turns out some folks are putting, I won't say money where their mouth is, but definitely some resources and energy. So Wiz is starting to work on this. They've actually got, I don't have my tabs open because it's just looking at this. I think it's Cloud CVE. John, I'm a bad person. I'll read and talk, but or else you'll Google while I'm talking here. So they've got, I think it's cloudcve.org, but basically they're working on this idea of, if there's a CVE for, and we're talking about cloud services, right? The end goal here to remind people is, how do you know if your cloud has a known vulnerability and a service you're using has a known vulnerability? Or the bigger gotcha where it gets interesting is, say you're consuming, I don't want to pick on someone, I don't know, widgets as a service from Widget Corp. Well, this is funny, I don't want to pick on somebody. But anyways, so widgets as a service, you're using that, you've been using it for a few months. Widget Corp realizes there's a vulnerability in that product. But so they go through, they patch it for all new customers of the widget service, they're fine. Right. But the problem here is if you're an existing widget service user, the cloud provider can't always go in and reconfigure or patch your service to make you secure because they might break something for you, and that's sort of not really great. So at that point, they might send you an email saying, hey, there's something there, you need to go and check this box or fix this or update or do whatever. But how do you know about that? Did you see the email? Did it go into your spam folder? Did it maybe go to someone no longer with the company? All these sort of things. So the idea is this is where we need some sort of an identifier, literally a CVE or something like that, which we've used for years by the scanners to say, we scan your service, we see you've got a vulnerability in CVE 2019-99999. What's equivalent of that for the cloud? So that's really the core problem that's going on here. So they're working on it. They've got there's a Slack out there, folks can go and hop in and start talking about this. And then additionally, it turns out that Cloud Security Alliance is also working on this, or was working. Well, they are still working on it. So now it seems like those two groups are trying to figure out, can we work together and get some more stuff done. So if folks are interested, we got some links in the notes, and we're hoping to come back and talk some more about this as it gets more concrete over the next few months.
Yeah, and I think the part that stood out to me was exactly what you were highlighting, that aspect of it's great to see a forward progress towards better secure defaults, but we need some way to figure out what's the tail of people who have, who the cloud service provider can't go and automatically update and bring up to the current baseline. And so that's a really great reason to need this language and basically ability to track it. I think we've got a bunch of other exploits and vulnerabilities to talk about, but maybe real quick, I pulled in another article just talking about the shared responsibility model that might be a good tie-in for this topic, since we're talking about the cloud security providers. And it's not necessarily too meaty of an article, but it just sort of it did remind me in that aspect of where are the secure defaults for cloud security. I just lost my brain there. So let me just say, and again, of just maybe there's something to tie in. How do we have the tooling basically support what you were just describing to track those CVEs, keep them up to date, and et cetera? So I think that was where my mind was going to that. So not sure if there's anything else, or I'm just going to continue to babble.
I'll babble a little bit. My browser just crashed, so I lost all my tabs and all our news, but they'll come back in a second. But the big, and I've said it a few times this year, I'm going to keep banging on it because it's something I believe in passionately about right now, is what is the line between, as we have these scanners to find all these new vulnerabilities, how do we make that usable for people? How do we make sure that we're not overloading them? We still don't want to get the stuff that's important to them. I don't need them to find out that, like, hey, before we've always talked about, Apache showing its version number. Now are we going to say, hey, Amazon showing its version number, so we don't need the crap. And I know some vendors out there will want to have that in there to make their products look great and get people to buy them. But how do we really get stuff that people really care about? So that's sort of going to be the core drive for me on these things.
Yeah, I think this sets up a good segue. You had another article here that if we're talking about how do people know that a vulnerability exists, how do they know they need to update it, this is what we want to try and push for with CVEs, with some type of a centralized notification mechanism or something that's predictable. But then we can also run into situations where, what is this, Sky Wi-Fi routers had vulnerabilities for 18 months.
Yeah, we had two of them here. It's like router week, I guess, in application security world. So I'm going to cover both at once because I don't think they deserve something separate. Well, maybe a little bit, but Sky, for our friends over in Europe, and I guess some of the US, those who watch Formula One and have to deal with the Sky commentators, unfortunately. Sky makes their own routers. They've got known vulnerabilities in them for the last 18 months. And we can actually almost tie 3 together here. We got some DNS stuff going on this week too. But so they're vulnerable to a DNS rebinding attack, which means it's really an interesting thing. I don't know, Mike, if you've seen this actually weaponized in an automated fashion. It sounds like something that an attacker would do manually, and it seems almost like a timing thing. But basically, you let a browser go to a website. So it goes through your standard IP stack of doing a DNS lookup, all those type of things. And then halfway through this process, you force a reset on, you basically have a really short timeout on that DNS. So it has to go and query that again. This time, the browser has now accepted your origin requirements and things like that. So now when the attacker goes and modifies the DNS and points at a different site, you've suddenly got the browser to be able to go somewhere that it wasn't supposed to go. And where that comes into interest here is not just the rebinding itself, but also the lovely Wi-Fi routers from Sky, I guess, almost all of them had default passwords, which now we put a few things together and you have an iframe on your web page you get someone to go to. They go ahead and suddenly they're rebound, and it convinces the browsers to load HTTPS 192.168.1.1/ blah, 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 blah. And you've got access to the person's Wi-Fi router. And once you've got that, once you own the network, it's game over for most of these type of things. So that's the problem. It took them 18 months. They responded quickly, immediately to the issue, but things seem to slow down from there. And if you've got, for folks who don't think about ISPs or telcos, how you do this is a little different. So the telco, like Comcast and things like that here in the US and Sky, the telco usually controls everything right down to that cable modem, and in some cases the Wi-Fi router. That allows them to set configurations, to set bandwidth controls over how much are you getting, what you're paying for, you're not getting more. Is the firmware and OS up to date on those routers and modems? And so there's basically, I'm saying this has, there's a lot of testing which has to go into. So these guys tend to move very slowly on the updates for these, because if they push out a bad update, you suddenly have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of users that can't access their porn, and it gets on the front page of the news, and no one likes that. So they tend to move slow, but still 18 months is really sort of pushing it. But if I remember right, if you look in this article, they've got, it was a pretty long list. Well, not huge, but at least 6 or 7 different routers were affected by this. So that means you have to actually determine the patch across all those, do the testing across all those. You know, I can see why it takes a while, but not 18 months. And then ramming that straight together with the other one, Netgear Soho routers, Mike, which I'm sure you're a fan of, have our old friend UPnP. We haven't seen a UPnP vulnerability for quite a while, as far as I know. But anyways, there's another one out there now in Netgear's, particularly their Soho routers, not all their stuff. They've got a few different lines. But with this, you can do a UPnP attack. UPnP is usually used for, how would I say, discovery of services on your network, as well as allowing automatic dynamic configuration of packet forwarding through a router. Say, like, so if someone's playing a video game and you want to be able to get access, bidirectional access out to the network, usually UPnP is done through that. But there is an ability to do an RCE through that, which allows someone to own your Netgear router. And again, we're back to that concept of this isn't a good time. So those two, and I'll stop there for now. How about that?
Yeah, that the Netgear router, the pre-authentication buffer overflow, not a great phrase to have in an advisory. But it was, as you're describing that, it's making me think a little bit of time back to our interview segment we just had with Liam about the WebAssembly and the sandboxing around that. Because as this article about the Netgear example was saying that the UPnP daemon had this buffer overflow, which sadly in this day and age still exists, but was also, the process executing this was running as root. And therefore, there was a lot of additional game over that could be done in the good Hicks model of aliens exploitation, where that I would be curious to see how WebAssembly would respond, react, be different for this, both on the sense of its stack hardening, as well as just the capability model that might be a bit more secure by default and doesn't have as many privileges available to the call it the UPnP WebAssembly process. In this made-up scenario, would it be able to have the same post-exploitation benefits? So I don't know. That's a rhetorical question. We'll have to have Liam back on, or of course, listeners, if you have some ideas, if you're playing with WebAssembly yourself, let us know, or we'll see who will go out and rewrite the entire router OS inside WebAssembly and see how that what that looks like. We are talking about vulnerabilities and DNS, which gives me a good chance to pull in an article about malicious Python packages. Now, in this case, once again, it was a little bit of a snooze fest for me. We've just shifted from, I think, NPM that we were talking about the last 2 weeks and malware to PyPi, Python packages. What stood out here, what was pretty cool, is that unfortunately, one of the common things that I will say as a recommendation is think about your egress filtering. Why, when you're developing, all of these applications and pulling in dependencies, would you be going out to random web locations? Typically, your CI/CD and your dev environments should just be pulling packages from trusted sources. Trusted being in a bit scare quotes, in the sense of we trust based on just a domain name. In this case, looking at pypi.python.org, if I just got the domain quite right, this was the same domain that the command and control of this malware that came through these packages was using. So it does point out that you have to keep in many aspects of a threat model in mind as you're developing and hardening your CI/CD environment. So I don't think this would point out to say I'm wrong in saying we need better egress filtering for your, as you're pulling down packages, but maybe it does build the case for having your own internal mirror that you're using, in that progress of maturing the, hardened layer around how you're handling packages. So that was a little bit of the public service announcement, I suppose, I wanted to get. So I'm talking about yet another compromised package.
The way you package it there towards the end makes a really good case, thank you, for using something like JFrog, where these guys have been doing this for at least 10 years, not probably closer to 20 now, I think, of having, that's their bread and butter is doing on-prem binary repos. So, but then the next thing I'm going to do with JFrog is add the word open source to my Google search and go, is anyone doing this? There has to be like some sort of a knockoff out there in open source world, but if there is, I'm not easily finding it. And the reason I'm saying this is I agree with what you're saying that, we were talking containers last hour, so, we did this like with containers, we had private repos. Mm-hmm. We've done this like, if you go into a large professional software shop, they'll usually have like control over what libraries can be used in your compiles. Now we're talking the same thing with NPM and with Python, and we need to have a separate conversation if it's PP or PyPi. But the point being here, do we have all sorts of separate repos, or can we have one thing? Can we have like some sort of centralized thing that does this? And the startup kids out there, there's time to go off and work on a new startup idea. But unfortunately, the YC invites went out last week, so you'll have to wait a while. But yeah, I don't know. When I first saw these last week, the thought going through my head was, is this stuff really new? Or have we been, we've seen them occasionally over the years. Were these always happening, we just didn't notice them as often? Or is there actually a focused uptick in this style of, I don't want to call it an attack, but I guess attack, I'll say malicious activity. Attack to me is a much more intent, targeted, focused thing. But is this been ongoing, or are we just now shining the light on it? I think that's what's sort of curious to me.
That is interesting, and it ties into, I think, just the broader idea that as certain hardening steps come, as we talk about supply chain security, et cetera, and the CI/CD becomes, certain parts of it become hardened, and the attackers will shift to different parts of the attack surface and different techniques. So if we see, for example, we want to see more developers having FIDO keys preferably, or, multi-factor authentication for all their accounts. So attackers then are shifting to maybe targeting packages, or targeting those packages where developers don't have multi-factor authentication on. And that was the very specific example last week in the NPM that we talked about. So I think, I basically just saying, I think I agree with you in the sense that I see this as a shift in the targeting, but not necessarily something new. Maybe we're just talking about it and seeing something new. Who knows? I will say the other things that we aren't seeing new is cross-site scripting, blah, blah, blah. Once again, kind of boring. And we're going to did this slightly as a present to you, John. We have to maybe pick on Microsoft. One more article this week on the poor Exchange server. But speaking of on-prem, why are you running your on-prem emails in this day and age? There's an article here about reflected XSS and Exchange server. Mostly I pulled it out to show that this was found because the researchers were trying to reproduce the proxy logon vuln. So they were saying, here's a really cool vuln that's kind of a new way of looking at attack surface, to tie it into your previous comment there about these malicious packages. And they're trying to understand, what does proxy logon look like? What are these unexplored areas within Exchange, and lo and behold, they found a exciting cats doing shenanigans in the background, which you possibly can hear, or the researchers found some cross-site scripting, and they did some clever things along the way. So that was how I tried to pull in something that was broader and more relevant to researcher mentality, researcher techniques, rather than just talking about cross-site scripting.
And thank you. You gave your stumbly co-host a chance to get back on the line after I keep hanging up. There's some key combination I'm doing that's making me hang up Skype today. So thank you for that. I saw this, and I don't know if I had anything really interesting to say. I didn't look at it closely. My angst at the folks in Redmond is sort of gone for now. What is not surprising, but what is interesting is the number of ongoing attacks we're seeing against Exchange and O365. And I think they've done themselves a bit of a non-favor here. My understanding is there's a pretty decent amount of both functionality differentiation as well as code differentiation between their hosted Exchange, which is O365. Well, hosted Exchange, O365, and on-prem Exchange. So, your buck is going to differ depending on which one of those you attack and who you're going after. In theory, if you're using O365, they should be updating this stuff for us. So that's sort of a plus. It's an interesting area. All you have to do is go over to Paul Asadorian and mention the words Active Directory, and he's going to be running for the next 2 hours. You think I'm bad? This is part of the thing with the Microsoft ecosystem. Is the reason that we go into an ecosystem like that is for the promise of that Active Directory gives us. Really, to be honest, that's really what it comes down to. Back to the Dave Culver days and setting up that architecture of being able to have really granular, really great enterprise authentication and authorization. And then how do you apply that to Teams? How do you apply that to probably GitHub, Visual Studio, all your file sharing? We're now talking about, do we want to host our internal videos on whatever it is that Microsoft has versus YouTube, because we've got the enterprise controls. So there's value around these type of things. But that guy is so complex. Again, we're talking Azure AD versus on-prem AD, which are, again, two different beasts. What I'm getting to as I'm babbling here is once you bring that level of sophistication and complexity in, you're bringing in a chance for not obviously the XSS here like this by itself, that should be taken care of, but you've got a very treasure-rich environment that if you're able to get an XSS and get some sort of hokey play going on in there, you've got a better chance of pay dirt on it. So that's sort of I guess why we keep seeing it.
We do. And you reminded me as you're saying that we covered back in May, I'll have to find out the specific episode number, but an article from Phil Venable, and it was talking about the complexity, which was the word you used, versus security. And it was getting more to the aspect, I think, of, complex perhaps can be secured, but if you have opinionated choices, if you have secure defaults rather than these multi-page hardening guides, which, we didn't get into it in our chat in the last segment with Liam about WebAssembly, but hopefully the future of WebAssembly is not going to be, a CISA and NSA produced 20-page PDF hardening article about here's how to use WebAssembly securely. Hopefully it's just 3 bullet points that pretty much just starts off with keep it up to date, install, yeah, exactly, and compile with LLVM, and boom, you're done. So that's where my fingers are crossed on.
Yeah, we didn't get into it with him there. Like we set off, we were talking to Liam between the break or during the break. Is we could have kept yapping about that for at least another hour. So hopefully we'll have him back. But one of the questions I had we didn't cover is what percentage of people now are writing in WASM directly versus are compiling to it? Because I think if you're compiling to it, then you should have a little more control over what gets into the language. How it's used, all those type of things. But even if I don't know. So I think there's a lot more to be dug into there. I see the potential, but I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes.
Yeah, definitely something that we'll be keeping an eye on, especially throughout 2022. There'll be some fun stuff. And going to shift to, we've been talking about vulnerabilities, and we like to highlight researchers who write up great articles, and researchers, and some of those articles come from bug bounty reports. One of the things that came across my radar was from BugCrowd, their Inside the Mind of a Hacker 2021 edition. Now, one of the things I've tried to do over the last several months is avoid too much of the marketing PDFs that are behind registration walls. Because either they're light on technical goods or they just require getting onto marketing lists. So apologies to listeners if you want to dive into this PDF. You do have to provide an email address. Don't provide mine, maybe use John's. But the PDF I wanted to highlight, it talks about the demographics of bug bounty researchers. And one of the things that stood out is that Gen X is only like 2%. So, nobody's going to recognize really the Max Headroom interruption here. And everyone's pretty much millennials and Gen Z, which awesome. More power to you for, keeping the AppSec testing going. But one of the things that did stand out is that perhaps unsurprisingly, the bug bounty researchers through BugCrowd's view is predominantly male. There is, low single-digit 3% female, less than 1% or so, non-binary, gender fluid researchers in their group. And so I did want to highlight that just in the spirit of, if we're going to talk on the show about empathy and collaboration between an AppSec team and a DevOps team, it's also important to have empathy and understanding within the people that make our community. And part of that is asking those questions about why is that representation so low, and how do we make sure that we move beyond discussions about a pipeline problem and focus more on how do we make sure people come in and stay within the application security industry or just InfoSec industry in general. And so it was one of those numbers that doesn't look great. Kudos to BugCrowd for at least highlighting it. It's not the blame that goes to BugCrowd in this case. They're just showing the numbers. But it's one of those things that I think, as a call out to listeners, when you come across great research articles, let us know, especially if they're from underrepresented groups. We'd love to highlight them. So that was a bit of the angle I wanted to take onto that PDF. And John, not sure if you've had a chance to look at that, or if there's something else around just bug bounty programs for that matter, or the researcher crowd that you were thinking of.
I saw it last week, and I closed it, and I can't find it to look at it again. I did want to give our users a quick update. When they're sending me those emails, they can send them to mike@securityweekly.com. That is my email address. I didn't know it's your email address. But anyways, I love the idea of what they're doing here. And we got this from one of our other co-hosts, who my name is completely blanking on the dude's name, even though I love him. But yeah, my mind is blanking on all sorts of things today. But no, I think this is super important. I know as soon as we start talking about this, we're going to get some pushback from some folks about both sides of this coin, and everyone's a person, we should treat them equally. But at the same time, what we've seen, Adrian, thank you for giving this to us. And sorry for getting your name. But tons of studies, I don't remember if it was in this one, but tons of studies have been done showing if we get different people into the room with us, it allows us to hear other voices and change how we think about these things, whether that's men or women or red hair or blue hair or trans or straight or gay or anything. Let's cover all of them. So black and white and Asian and American Islanders, and you get what I'm saying, right? Is I want to have as much diversity as I possibly can before I do things, because we all have different backgrounds, and how I think about solving a cross-site scripting problem with Microsoft Exchange versus how Mike thinks about it is probably going to be different. Right? I'm going to say stop using Exchange, and he's probably going to say something else. So actually, I like Exchange, but anyways, we're going to probably keep banging on this because this is something that's very near and dear to both our hearts. So hopefully people will put up with this and help echo what's going on here. We want to have as much of this as we possibly can. So thank you.
Indeed. And I think the one other thing I'll add there is you were bringing up those aspects of, thinking about taking things apart. Part of that also is the think of it as the trust and safety issue or product abuse. Different groups are impacted differently by the features within social media applications, different applications, and they can bring experiences that give different and better, for that matter, appreciation of how different features can be abused, which it should be part of a good threat model. So just other reasons to have good diverse groups working on your application security, as well as building the apps on the DevOps side as well. I'm going to segue now. Don't have a good segue, but we were talking, I suppose, about vulnerabilities, people finding vulnerabilities and exploiting them, writing up those vulns, and I suppose last week we talked about Robinhood, who is that breach that is a safety first company. We've moved beyond. We take your security and privacy seriously from boilerplate breach post breach announcements. But here is an article that does venture a little bit into not quite a think piece, but doesn't go too technical, but is about how to estimate legal costs from a data breach. Now, I will say, if you don't care about the legal side of things and disclosure side of things, no problem. That's what you have a legal department for. Skip down to the bottom where it's talking about some of the regulatory impacts. And these are impacts that, you don't necessarily have to be reactive to. You could be proactive on policies and procedures, on auditing, basically doing security testing, on thinking about different solutions and saying, yes, we actually will enforce good multi-factor authentication with FIDO keys, and we'll support WebAuthn protocol. We'll have security awareness training, or we'll have effective security awareness training. There's probably a whole episode we could do on that. So this is what, I just wanted to highlight this. If you are in the spirit of trying to expand the conversation beyond just the technical impacts of breaches and the purely technical parts of application security, that there are people and processes behind this too. So I'm not sure if I've fully landed that thought very well, or if I need to go back and think this through a little bit better. But at the very least, it's a good list of breaches.
No, this caught our attention last week at my little startup. This is extremely near and dear to our heart, and you're probably starting to hear me talk about things like this, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, about making, let's cut some of the noise out. Let's actually get to the meat of what people need to solve to stay secure. And in particularly something like this, right, is again, another thing I'm always banging on a drum of. I'd love to talk to everyone here listening, our AppSec people, but I'm much more interested in talking to the developers or to operations or the business people or people outside my little neck of the woods, my little bubble. How do I get them to understand? How can I communicate efficiently with them about what is passionate to me and why I'm not just saying no to stop them from doing things. I'm trying to protect the business and then trying to allow them to do business. And what, all you have to do, and we saw this, I can say this without naming names. We were pitching someone a month or so ago, and the investor was sort of tuned out. And we suddenly started talking numbers, percentages, or dollars about potential save for a customer. And he'll never listen to this. Dude, I've got a screenshot of you. Your eyes just lit up. It was hilarious. It was, once you're able to talk in someone's language, you go from being, just some other, okay, great, it's another sort of startup, they're going to save the day, and, enterprise security, blah, blah. But once you're able to actually, and leave the start part out of it, any of us talking to our managers or their bosses, at some point it comes down to dollars, right? Even if you're working for the government, there's still dollars behind it. Where do you spend and why? So if you're able to look at something like this and provide some amount of data, some amount of math behind it, and let's be honest, the math might not be accurate, might not be close to accurate, but if you're able to provide sound reasoning behind why you want to do something and show numbers for it, that's huge. So this doesn't look like a long paper. It's a blog post, right? But the thoughts behind it are quite powerful, I think.
Yeah, quite powerful and good way to lead into strategic thinking. So I know I have a habit of often repeating what you say just to reinforce it, because there's often good points, but I will let people rewind the minute and a half or so and go listen to it again themselves. We are getting to the end here, and breaking news, I will say that Security Weekly Unlocked is going to be moving to a virtual conference, which hopefully means that more of you will be able to attend. We'll also be shifting to the date to December 16th, and we'll have more information about that in an upcoming episode and this week's announcement. So also check out the rest of the Security Weekly podcast friends here and shows that are our friends here in the Security Weekly network. And that was the quick update that you highlighted helpfully, John. Anything else that we should end on for any final words and last highlights?
Two things. One, a reminder for everyone that Mike's email address, my email address is mike@securityweekly.com. And then the second thing, I didn't put this in the show notes. I might throw it in afterwards. I thought it was very interesting. Is this is more of a BSW or an ASW type article, so we'll see if it goes in. But Stitch, STYTCH, last week raised $90 million in their Series B at a $1 billion valuation for doing API-first passwordless authentication. So when we talk about some of these things, we're talking about authentication and how do we make this easier for people, and let's worry about the rules or don't worry about the rules, or how can we allow someone to minimize the process of remembering all their passwords. There's money in this, right? And there's hopefully a lot of benefit to folks. So I thought that was interesting and just highlight that on the way out.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to highlight for all the Gen X brethren out there, as well as any millennials and Gen Z who are interested in history and fun dystopian TV pop culture, go check out Mech's Headroom, especially the episode called Blipverts. And then if you are brave enough, check out Matt Frewer and Lawnmower Man 2 Beyond Cyberspace. With that, I want to thank everybody for joining us. I want to thank John, thank everybody in Discord. We'll see you next week on Application Security Weekly.